this presentation is titled, it was kind of like, wow, learner perspectives on L2 pragmatics instruction. Like Eva said, my name is Anders Myrset, and I work at the University of Stavanger. So for today's presentation, I'm going to present what is a chapter from an upcoming book that Eva also mentioned. And I included this QR code if you're interested. And I tested this QR code earlier today, so it still works as of today at least. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about what pragmatics is. I realized that perhaps not everyone are familiar with this field. And then I'm going to talk about the project. So this was part of my PhD project some years ago, and that I will be presenting today, or part of. So I'm going to look a little bit at teaching pragmatics with young language learners, and then show some activities that we used, and then finally the learner perspectives from this. And so what is pragmatics? And I thought I'd just pose a question for you. So are you teaching topics related to pragmatics in your classroom? And maybe you do. You probably do, even if you're not aware of it. And I'm going to show you some examples now, and maybe during this presentation, you'll realize that you're actually working within this field as well. So the most commonly used definition, or one of the most commonly used, is this one by Crystal, where he says that the study of pragmatics is the study of language from the point of view of users, especially of the choices they make, the constraints they encounter in using language in social interaction, and the effects their use of language has on other participants in the act of communication. It's a bit of a mouthful, so Bardavi Harlig has introduced this cocktail party definition, which is a bit easier. So second language pragmatics is the study of how learners come to know how to say what to whom when. And so pragmatics has to do with how language is used and interpreted in interaction. And that means that it's very context dependent. And it's also about how we use language to achieve specific actions. So if we have this example here of these two characters in the cartoon. So we could ask, okay, what is the language form that the speaker has chosen? And what is the speaker trying to achieve? And then the hearer, how does the hearer interpret this and why? And so most of you will probably recognize this as a request for a little bit of change so that she also can buy a coffee. But at the same time, it's not necessarily what is communicated unless you notice it based on the situation or where this utterance happens. And this is really at the core of what pragmatics deals with. And when we talk about pragmatics, there are two aspects that are commonly used. And so if you read literature on pragmatics, you will come across these two, pragmalinguistics and socio-pragmatics. And as you can see in this figure, there's quite a bit of overlap. So we often have to deal with both of them. And pragmalinguistics has to do with the language resources that are available for communicating specific meanings. So for instance, apologizing or complimenting, whereas socio-pragmatics have to do with the social and cultural aspects surrounding language use. So what is considered appropriate in a given context? Who is the hearer? Who is the speaker? What situation are they in? And so on. And the reason I'm mentioning these two terms is because these were very important parts of the instruction that I had with learners that I will be coming back to later. So when you hear pragmalinguistics, we're talking about the language resources. And when you hear socio-pragmatics, we're talking about the context and the situation. And then, okay, what can a focus on pragmatics involve? We can talk about idioms, irony, sarcasm. And what all of these have in common is that the meaning might be different from the utterance itself. So there's a non-literal meaning to what you're saying. Another one I chose not to include any linguistics examples of is cursing. And finally, the most commonly researched aspect of pragmatics is speech acts. All of these are mostly used in oral communication, and that's really where pragmatics has its main focus on oral communication, but written communication also involves pragmatics. So how we open, for instance, emails, how we close emails, and how we communicate various aspects within an email is also a topic that has been researched quite a bit within our field. But like I said, speech acts is the most researched area and also where my study was situated. And when we talk about speech acts, we could be talking about compliments and compliment responses, greetings and greeting responses, requests, refusals, and apologies, and many, many more. Another important aspect of my research or the instruction and what I have been working on quite a bit within my own research is metapragmatic awareness. And metapragmatic awareness is taking a step back from the situation itself and looking at the choices that we make in communication. So for instance, if we use this request as an example, we could be asking questions such as, what is the relationship between the speaker and the hearer? Is one of them the other one's boss, or are they colleagues? Where are they? Is anyone listening? How does she want to come across in this? Is she going to ask for a big or a small favor? And why has she decided to address him in this way? What else could she have said? And in relation to language learning, we have defined metapragmatic awareness as an ability to verbalize reflection. So answering questions such as the ones I just presented. Verbalizing reflections on the language, the context, and or their interplay. So for example, if we have these two neighbors who meet. So one says, good afternoon, neighbor, fancy seeing you here. And then the other says, Charles, how are you? And then if we pretend that this lady in the back is a foreigner, she observes this conversation and then she picks up on many of these aspects. So she notices how they greet each other when they walk into the shop. Okay, so there's the situation and what they actually do. Then she's picked up on the language that has been used. Fancy seeing you here. And then she's asking this question, okay, do they want to be polite? And again, going back to what are you trying to achieve in the communication? And so bringing in this situational aspect again. And then she comes up with a rule at the end saying that she has to remember this as well. And this is really at the core of metapragmatic awareness as we in the way that we have been working with it. So trying to figure or find ways that young learners can verbalize reflections on these aspects of communication. Okay, moving to what young language learners' pragmatic development looks like. And here, when I say young language learners, we have in our work defined it as ages 5 to 13, which is roughly the ages of primary education in Europe, give or take a couple of years in the beginning or the end of this. But this is at least the working definition or age range that we have been using. And so what do we know about pragmatic development? When it comes to speech act production, we know quite a bit. So there have been studies looking at one child, two children, for instance, in the classroom or at home in an L2 context. There have been cross-sectional studies that have looked at this, and combined, some of these studies have also resulted in developmental trajectories, different stages of speech act production, so what you're expected to be able to do at different levels. When it comes to interpretation of speech acts, we know a little bit. So studies that have looked at how learners find utterances appropriate or inappropriate and so on. There are some studies that have explored this. When it comes to metapragmatic awareness, so learners' ability to verbalize reflections, we don't know that much. There are studies that have looked at this. We have had some studies looking at young learners' metapragmatic awareness, but the field certainly needs more research on this topic. And finally, pragmatics instruction, we know very little. One of the early studies that tried out pragmatics instruction with young learners aged 7 to 12, Ishihara, in her article, she writes about how the field has viewed pragmatics as something that is for more proficient learners, something that you need to be mature to be able to achieve. And this was for a long time the belief of our research field. But in that study, it showed potential. So there were these learners who were able to expand their linguistic repertoire and reflect on different aspects of communication and pragmatic behaviors. And the same author, a couple of years earlier, I really like this quote because it shows how the field viewed pragmatics instruction at that time. So there was a lot of research that had been conducted with adults, mainly university students. And so we could make very firm claims about, okay, explicit instruction is the more beneficial, whereas when it comes to young children, it is unlikely. We don't know if it's the same because there has hardly been any research on it. And the same with development or how adults learn L2 pragmatics. We know a lot, whereas we don't know very much about how children develop L2 pragmatic competence. So in sum, it's a field that is growing. It's a field where there is still a lot to learn from when it comes to young language learners. But we do have some studies that have tried out and explored pragmatics instruction with young language learners. And that is important because if we look at, for instance, curricula across Europe, maybe abroad, outside of Europe as well, we see pragmatics related competence aims. And we see the same in the CEFR, so the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. They published 2 sets of descriptors for young language learners, ages 7 to 10 and 11 to 15 in 2018. And in both, in these, we can see both aims that have to do with production related to pragmatics and awareness. So that tells us that, you know, even though there hasn't been a lot of research within this field, there is an expectation that this is something that we need to teach young language learners. And so some studies have, of course, tried this out. And we see a positive impact on learners as young as 3 to 6. This particular study looked mainly at comprehension. We have seen a focus on different aspects of second language pragmatics, but I have to say that the majority of studies with young language learners as well have focused on request, which is very similar to the research field when it comes to adults. Request is the speech act that has been explored the most. But then we also have different teaching approaches that have been tried out. So we have studies that have tried dialogic instruction with learners. We have studies that have tried collaborative dialogue, looking at collaborative dialogue versus individual work. We see studies that are based on the noticing hypothesis, so Schmidt's work with explicit and implicit instruction. And then a concept-based approach, which is where my research comes in. So different approaches have been tried out, but we're still not at a stage where we can say that one seems to be more conducive to learning than others, which if anyone is interested in doing research within our field, the door is wide open basically to try out different aspects of pragmatics. So that brings us to my project. And just to give you an overview, like I mentioned initially, this was part of a PhD or my PhD project, what I'm presenting today. And the study was set in a Norwegian primary school, more specifically 7th grade. And so that's the last year of primary school in Norway, and the learners are aged 12 to 13. And I had 2 classes, approximately 50 pupils. The reason I'm saying approximately here is I had 1 learner who did not consent to participating. So that meant that she was part of the instruction, but she was not part of any data collection. And in addition, I had 1 group with a couple of learners who had lived in an English-speaking country for an extended period. And so the 2 of them, together with 2 other learners, they were involved in all stages of the data collection as a pilot group, but they did not they were not used as data in the study. The instruction itself was over the course of 4 weeks, and we had 60 minutes per week, 1 session lasting 30 minutes and 2 sessions lasting 15 minutes each. And the reason for this distribution was we tried to follow the English instruction in these classes, and they had 2 45-minute sessions every week and 1 90-minute session. So I had 1/3 of each class. So I taught for that 1/3, and then the regular English teacher would teach the rest of the class, focusing on something else. And this has led to a couple of articles on request production and meta-pragmatic reflections. Again, I tried these QR codes today. So if you're interested in these, you can scan them and take a look. So I'll give you a second to just scan them if you're interested before I move on. One focus, like I said, on request production, these pre, post, and delayed post test, and the other one was based on their meta-pragmatic reflections in group interviews. So moving to the instructional approach, and I will do very broad strokes here, so I'm happy to answer questions about this afterwards. But like I said, it was 4 weeks of instruction, where the first 2 weeks focused on pragmalinguistics. Here are those terms again. And the last 2 weeks focused on socio-pragmatics. And like I said, there is a lot of overlap between the two. So it's we didn't treat them completely separately. If it was necessary to also talk about the context when we had a focus on pragmalinguistics, we would. And then obviously in the with the focus on socio-pragmatics, we would bring in linguistic resources in that part as well. But the overarching aim of this instruction was to foster learner agency. So learners' ability to make informed choices in communication. So having a wide repertoire and being able to vary their communication depending on the situation and what they're trying to achieve. And the subordinate aims for this were introduce linguistic resources related to requesting, raise awareness of how the context may influence request choices, and then finally raise awareness of individual differences in perceptions of appropriateness. And what I thought I would do now in the presentation is just to give you a taste of what I did during the instruction. So for each aim, I will show you an activity and some input that we used, so you get an idea. And in addition to this, I will also show you reader's theater that we did as a framing activity before and after the instruction. And this will obviously also be reflected in the learner's perception when we get to that. So the first aim was to introduce linguistic resources. And I've given you example of a request here. So the focus of this instruction was on requesting and the situation and so on in which we request. And this is just an example, but it shows different strategies that we can use. And the only crucial bit to a request is what we refer to as the head act. So this part here that's underlined, can you give me a lift, please? And this can be performed in different directness levels. You could say, give me a lift. Can you give me a lift? Or you could say, I'm late for school. This example that we have at the end could have also been used as a head act. So basically what you're using to request something. And then everything else here is optional. We have an attention getter at the beginning, A. We have an address term, dad in this case. We have the marker please. And we have what's referred to in the literature as a grounder or a reason for why you're requesting. Like I said, all of this is optional. It's only the head act that you need. But these were the strategies that we introduced as concepts. And this is where this concept-based approach comes in. What we did for each of these strategies is that we used terminology from a seminal piece by Blum-Kolke et al., where they had a coding manual with every strategy that they identified in their big corpus. And then we adapted the terminology for the learners and provided definitions for each of the term. So these are, to the right here, are the concepts that we introduced for the head act. So direct, in between, or hint. And the way we introduced this in the beginning was that I would have loved to show you the clips now, but I don't have the permission to do so, but I'll explain what we show the learners. So there is a movie from the 90s called Dumb and Dumber. And in that movie, there's a scene when they're in a diner and they order the soup of the day and they order soda. And these are the utterances that they use in the clip. So we would watch the clip. It's about 3 minutes long. And we would watch it the first time and I would ask the learners if they noticed that the characters asked for something. And once we had discussed that as a class, we would watch the clip again. And then they were instructed to try to identify what the characters said. And then the same for the Big Bang Theory, which is a TV series. There is a scene where Sheldon and Amy are seated at the table. Sheldon has a conundrum about buying an Xbox or a PlayStation, and they're having dinner at the time. And while he is presenting this conundrum to Amy, she asks him to pass the butter, and she gets, sorry, I think my slides now, for some reason, disappeared. So I'm gonna go and share it again. Do we have the slides again? Or do I need to share them again?
You need to share them again.
Okay. Do we have them now?
Almost. Yeah, we got them.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. But she gets increasingly frustrated and then finally slams the table and yells, please pass the butter. And again, we did the same thing here. We watched the clip first. We asked if any characters asked for something, and then we watched it again the second time, and then they tried to identify what had been said. And then this slide is actually from the slides with the learners. So we would put these up on the board, apart from this, the Dumb and Dumber and the Big Bang Theory at the bottom. And then we would show them this continuum and place these requests in relation to the directness level. So we have 3 direct requests here. We have an in-between or a conventionally indirect, as it's called in the field, and then a hint or a non-conventionally indirect. And following this, we would show them a table with each of these strategies that you see at the bottom here on the continuum. And then we would give them linguistic examples a range of examples for each. So with that as a scaffold, the learners were then provided a worksheet, and they were instructed to change the directness level from one to the other. So for example, we have the request help me, which is a direct request. And then you could, for example, change it into a conventionally indirect request. And they would do this with all 9 examples. And the reason for this was to show that there are a variety of, there's a variety of different linguistic resources that you can use, which will basically communicate the exact same thing. You have the same intention with what you're saying, and you have a variety of ways of doing that. Okay, moving to the second aim, raise awareness of the context. So in this one, we split the class in half. So we had pupils A and we had pupils B. And pupils A were given a piece of paper with 6 different items to request. And then they were given a die. So each learner had these 2 objects that you see on the slide. And then pupil B was given a Post-it note with a characteristic on, so parent, teacher, friend, sibling, etc. And they would put that on their chest, and then they would have this sheet underneath, and it might be a little bit difficult to see what's on there, but it is basically all the concepts that we introduced during the first 2 weeks. And they were instructed or asked to try to keep tally of what kind of strategies were used when we had this activity. And in the activity, pupils A were mobile. They moved around the classroom. They would approach a pupil B who was seated. They would then roll the die. They would, based on the number, say they get the number 3, money. They would have to request and see what character or what role pupil B played. So they would read on the Post-it note and then produce a request. And what we tried to do here or try to achieve was to create a situation where they didn't have time to necessarily think or to plan what they were going to say. And then pupil B's tried to keep tally. That turned out to be a little bit more tricky than expected, maybe. But all of them managed to at least keep track of the directness levels. And that helped us afterwards because then we could discuss, okay, what kind of role did you have? Did you have mainly direct requests, in between requests, and so on? And we could then talk about, okay, why do we think that someone got more direct requests than others, and so on. So it gave us an opportunity afterwards. And so in this lesson, we split the activity in 2. So pupil A's and pupil B's would do this several times. Pupil A would go to several pupil B, and then after half the activity, we would swap roles so that pupil B's became pupil A and vice versa. Finally, aim 3 was to raise awareness of individual differences. And in this one, they were provided with a worksheet, which is taken from a pronunciation activity. And here we would have request pairs presented on a projector screen. And at each intersection, they would have to choose which one they thought was nicer by going left or right, which would, after 3 request pairs, they would end up in one of these black boxes at the top. And if you can't read, it's just names of cities at the top. And then after the activity, or once they'd reached the destination, we would do a raise of hands for each city. And so then we had a visual representation of who ended up in Sydney, Oslo, etc. And for each, I would read out the choices that they had made to get there. And what was interesting was that in both classes, they ended up in all this. So there were learners that ended up in each and every city. So there was a variety of choices that were made. And following the activity itself, we had a class reflection. We talked about, okay, why is it that we had different choices? Was the situation important for making these choices? Because we weren't really introducing any situation. We were just focusing on the linguistics, the language resources that were used. And so that led to a nice class reflection afterwards. And then finally, Reader's Theatre. Reader's Theatre, some of you might be familiar with what it is. It's a group reading aloud activity of any kind of text, where the text is divided into small chunks and read in a fixed order. And time is allotted for rehearsal before a performance. And this is really crucial because it is a repeated reading of a text, and this performance gives it authenticity, or it gives the rereading a purpose. They know that they're going to perform this at the end. Then another important part is that the script is visible during the performance. So it's really a focus on the reading itself. So you don't need any props or costumes. You can, of course, include those, but they're not necessary for the performance. And then it's an activity that aims to target basic skills. It's reading and obviously speaking aloud. The audience listens, and then you can also have the learners write their own scripts. So then it becomes a writing exercise as well. And what research has shown is that this is really a low threshold activity that many or most learners will be able to participate in. Now, Reader's Theatre has been researched quite a bit with young learners as well, but as to my knowledge, it had never been used in pragmatics research. So I was kind of interested to see how that would work in this type of instruction. And so Reader's Theatre was used in 2 cycles. In the first one, I had written scripts in advance with stories where children were in everyday situations and social encounters, such as buying a PlayStation or going to the shopping center and so on. And I made sure that I had a variety of situations for requests and also a variety of linguistic resources in the scripts. And then the learners were each given one of these stories and rehearsed and performed in groups of 4 to 5. And this was a way for me to introduce requests. So prior to the instruction, we already had this activity where they rehearsed and they performed. And then once we started the instruction, we could also go back to this to these scripts. In cycle 2, so after the instruction, they wrote their own scripts in the same groups. And here I provided them with prompts from the same, basically describing the situations from the first cycle. So if, for instance, a group had read the script buying a PlayStation the first time around, maybe the next time they would get prompts for going to the supermarket. And so they wouldn't write the script for the same story that they had performed previously. But this made sure that there was like these prompts included situations where they would have to write requests. And these scripts were then used later in group interviews as part of discussion for the choices that they had made and why and so on. Okay, so the data that I'm presenting today is from group interviews. I had 11 groups of 4 to 5 learners, so 46 in total. And then I had this pilot group prior to these 11 groups. Each interview lasted approximately 30 minutes, and I used an emoticon appraisal task as a prompt. And the appraisal task looks like this. And I know smileys or emoticons may not be the, or some might disagree with the choice, but this is at least what we used in this study. And these items here in the first column are basically the key parts of the instruction. So Reader's Theatre Cycle 1, the instruction itself, Cycle 2 of Reader's Theatre, and then this last one is a data collection instrument that I used that I won't be talking about today, but I was really curious to see what they or how they perceived it. And then you can see that there are 2 empty slots here at the bottom, and this was for the learners themselves to choose other things that they want to appraise during the or from the project. And so what this looked like then, if you bear with me, pretend that this is a desk, and then you pretend that this circle is me. I had my 4 learners next to me like this. And then I would present them with this sheet printed in A3. And then I would tell them, okay, I would explain what we did for the performances, remind them, I handed out some scripts for you, etc. And what did you think about those? Do you think it was fun, so-so, or not so fun? And then they would all have markers in different colors, and they would put a mark where they, based on their appraisal. And we would do these for each of these 4 items that I had, and then ask them if they wanted to appraise anything else, and then we would do that. And then afterwards, we would have a discussion based on their first nonverbal responses. So if they said something was green, this smiley face, why was it green? What made it green? If they said, for instance, that something was the red frowny face, what could we have done to improve it? Why didn't you like it? And so on. And so here's an example of one group's responses, and you can see that they have added some additional items that they wanted to appraise, and they've also been a little bit agentive with the marking, turning into smiley faces and crowns, etc. But this is one of the 11 groups. So their feedback based on this. I'm showing you this table just so you get an overview. You can see that the learners, they actually found it difficult to respond to just 3. So they wanted to add 2 additional levels to this scale. And then you can also see that they're mainly positive to these 3. So readers theater, cycle 1 and 2, and instruction. Whereas the videos, they're not so positive about. The majority there are kind of in between. And I said I wouldn't talk about these, but I chose to include them anyway, because I think that this shows how the learners were honest in their responses, that they didn't necessarily feel like they had to be positive about everything. So the learners' responses to Readers Theatre, they were mainly positive. They found it to be a confidence-building activity, where some of the learners said in the interviews that they didn't often speak out loud in class. But now, through Readers Theatre, they were actually able to show that they were able to speak English as well. It was also a new activity for them. It was something that they hadn't tried out with their regular English teacher. And they found the collaboration to be meaningful. So working together as a group, preparing a performance, getting to choose what to do in the performance and so on was something that they found valuable. And the same for the script writing as well. Even though they had prompts, they still had quite a bit of freedom within that to create their stories. And this, to me, suggests the potential for using Readers Theatre within second language pragmatics research. It's a way for learners to collaborate, and it's also a way for us as teachers or researchers to tailor text that include relevant pragmalinguistic and socio-pragmatic features in these texts. But at the same time, I have to also say that some were less positive. Some found it difficult to write the scripts, and once they found it difficult, they also found it boring. And some also reported that working in groups were sometimes challenging, reaching an agreement and compromising and so on.
Anders, you have about 5 minutes.
Thank you. When it comes to the instruction, again, they were mainly positive. One of the most interesting parts of this for me was that they found, first of all, request was novel to them. So it was something that they hadn't really focused on with their regular teacher. But also that they found this systematic focus through concepts. So actually treating language systematically and analytically was something that they found engaging. So they saw that this helped them with that they had a wider variety that they could use. They had learned new methods or new strategies for asking in English. And also that they found this meaningful. So they saw that this is something that they would need in the future. And when they talked about this, they mentioned, going abroad for holiday, if they choose to study abroad. And I remember one of them even talking about signing a contract as a handball player in the future. So they would have different examples of how they saw this as meaningful. They were also positive to the activities. So the dice game, for instance, was popular. It was something that they hadn't really done before, and it was something that they felt like they were doing as a whole class. Everyone was involved as pupil A or pupil B and got to participate all the time. The same with the request perception journey. And here is where this quote in for the title for the presentation comes in. It was kind of like, wow. And what the learner was referring to here was that this created this wow factor of realizing that although even within this, you could kind of say a homogeneous group of learners, they were all in the same class, they had different views on what was considered nice. And then what happens when you go abroad or when you speak to people of different ages and so on. And so this was something that they highlighted during the interviews as well. And this tells me that learners are ready for second language pragmatics in primary school, going back to this quote from Ishihara in 2013, this view that we had within the field that you have to be at a certain level of proficiency or maturity to be able to deal with these kind of topics. Actually, maybe we can start even earlier. So where do we go from here? Well, young language learners seem to enjoy second language pragmatics instruction. And we all know how important it is to be engaged and be motivated, etc., for language learning to happen. And then the question is, can we take advantage of this to teach second language pragmatics? And readers' theater was positively received. So if we think about all the positive findings from research looking at their reading development and motivation and so on, can we use some of this knowledge in the field of second language pragmatics? So incorporating it into our teaching and research, and also other forms of drama and movement into second language pragmatics instruction. And then finally, we need more research on L2 pragmatics instruction. So we have some studies that have shown benefits or a positive impact with second language pragmatics instruction, but the main research area or focus has been requests. We need other speech acts. We need other parts of second language pragmatics, such as idioms and sarcasm and irony and all those things. And this will really help us move the field forward and giving us a better understanding of young language learners' development. And so with that, I would like to thank you. And I would also like to mention that this book that was that Eva mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, I talked to the publishers and they have been kind enough to give a discount in relation to this presentation. So if you're interested, this discount expires on the 15th of July. But that if you're interested in what I presented here today and the topic of pragmatics, then this book focuses on these aspects. So thank you very much for listening to me, and these are my references for the presentation.
Thank you so much. This was a perfect timing, Anders. 45 minutes on the dot. Okay. Thank you so much. Sandy, do you first do your part, or is this for the end?
Yes, I can do this bit.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I see the slides are
Just a
moving,
reminder,
so
yeah. So thank you, Anders. So this is just a reminder that this session is part of the second ELRA Web Festival to celebrate our second anniversary. We are a scholarly. We support scholarly cooperation in early language learning research worldwide, and you can get more information by going to the elra.org on your website on the internet, and do check out the membership tab. And I look forward to welcoming you to ELRA if you're not already a member. Thank you, Anders.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing now, and so that so I can see all these friendly faces.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for this presentation. It was very detailed, and it gives, I think, it gave a great overview of both the field and your study, which I find very interesting. So I would like to open the floor for questions. You can put your hand up, or you can write your question in the chat. Well, maybe while the audience is getting warmed up, I can ask a question of my own. I have a few actually, but I wanted to, well, just to start with something very simple. I wanted to ask you, as a researcher working with these kids, what was most interesting for you? Which of these activities did you enjoy implementing?
Very good question. Thank you. I think that the discussion and what I found both in this instructional study, but also when we've had these studies looking at their metapragmatic understandings, I find it really fascinating how young learners talk about these things. I think that there has been an assumption that, again, that they're not capable of talking about it, but it's really about the questions that we ask and being open to other ways of responding, not necessarily that they will say things exactly as we would expect them to do. But once you analyze and once you actually think about what they're saying, it's quite sophisticated. Some of the things that we have heard from third graders and fifth graders are very much represented in, for instance, the research on or theories on politeness, linguistic politeness. And so I think that was, for me, one of the most interesting parts of the instruction as well, to hear what these children had to say about communication and the situation, how that plays in, and yeah. I hope that answers your questions. Your question, Eva.
It does, and I believe you completely that I mean, I've read your papers, and it does sound fascinating that you know, they actually think that way. Sandy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was able to find the raised thing this time. Thank you, Anders. That was really interesting. I especially appreciated how much detail you gave us about the way you went about your research and how you collected your data, and it was very interesting. And I also really like seeing the example of how the children, how you were seated, and how the children, you know, made their crosses or their smileys or their crowns, and this notion of you know, trying to be individual. It was very nice. And I was also very interested in the reading theatre that you chose to include. And so in course books, we have a lot of, you know, these written texts, often in sort of cartoony kind of versions, which children are asked to role play. And so I have two questions. One is, do you think that these are opportunities for teachers to be more aware of, and I'm not quite sure which of the pragmatic words I should use there, which of the terms that you introduced at the beginning, but do you think this is an opportunity for course book writers to sort of play more with pragmatics generally, but make it more explicit for the teacher and teacher instruction? And then, and my other question is, and this is because I'm very interested in speaking production and speaking interaction in particular, and the need for spontaneity. So how can we move from these reading theatre moments, which are very structured because they're reading, to a much more spontaneous form of student-student interaction, and also encourage them to use these forms that we're trying to target anyway. So yeah, I think is that clear where I seem to be coming from?
Yes, I've taken some notes. I hope I'll be able to answer your questions, and if not, please just remind me. But I think what you said about textbook writers or textbook authors, I mean, Eva, amongst other scholars within our field, have looked at what textbooks provide now in terms of pragmatics content, and it's very slim with young learners. And I think that for textbook authors, I would like to see more of a variety of speech acts, and also variety within speech acts. What, for instance, with requests, it's mainly imperatives that they come across. Which makes sense if you think about, you know, if there are instructions to the learners. But if that's the only thing you're coming across in your textbooks, then that might be a problem when you go out and communicate in the real world. And so I think when it comes to readers' theater, I have to say that part of the reason why I wanted to use this in the first place was that this was something that I did for my master's thesis, which is now, it's been a while since, but then I explored the use of this, and I saw how positive it was for the learners, and perhaps especially learners who struggle a bit in English, that this was a safe way of practicing and using the language. And so I wanted to see if there were ways of incorporating this into this research. And then it became one part of it, and I explored many other things as well. I think, of course, it won't be authentic, and it is very much a practice thing. But at the same time, it gave me an opportunity to introduce a variety of language in these scripts. I think when it comes to spontaneity, that is obviously a crucial thing, and which, I mean, pragmatics is mainly an oral, or within our field, the main focus has been on oral communication. And I try to, at least, you know, you will never be fully authentic in the language classroom. That's but I try to create situations that captured at least aspects of it. So for instance, with this dice game, that they had to think on the spot and communicate without planning. So these were activities that I tried. I had a different type of dice game as well, where they were just sitting next to each other and trying back and forth, requesting. We had an onion circle, so an inner and an outer circle facing each other, and then they would request from each other. So I tried different things to try to capture part of that spontaneity, but at the same time, I didn't invite different ages into the classroom. I didn't have access to speakers from around the world who could come in and be part of the instruction. So of course, there were limitations. One thing I did that had more to do with the reflections was that I gave them homework. So I asked them to go home and interview their parents or guardians and ask them if they communicate in English at work, for instance, and if they've had people ask them for something or to do something for them, and if they could remember what had been said. And also they asked parents to evaluate linguistic forms and then trying to explain the reasoning for their parents' reasoning. Why do you think your parents said that this was a nicer form than this? So we try to capture different parts, but at the same time acknowledging, you know, this was very much a formal instructional situation. We were in a classroom and had limitations as any classroom. I hope
Okay.
that answers your
Yes, I
question.
think so. Yes, I think so. But just to comment on, because Gila Schauer, is that how I
Yeah.
say her name? Yes.
Mhm.
She's done a lot of work with pragmatics within picture books as well, hasn't she?
Mm.
Yes, which is also interesting. It's nice that I didn't realize that you've done quite so much, Eva. I know that you've done the analysis of, or the evaluation analysis of the of intercultural and in textbooks. So I didn't realize you'd gone further and done more. So I'll have to look at that. Do you have to share?
That was the intercultural part. That was more my boss's topic.
Ah, okay.
I'm
Okay.
more into pragmatics.
Okay, okay. That's
Yeah.
cool. That's very nice. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Anders. That's great.
Yeah, thanks, Anders. Shauna has her head up, and we have a question from Beck after Shauna in the chat. Or Shauna, was it an accident? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Sorry, I've temporarily lost my Zoom skills. I beg your pardon.
It happens.
Anders, that was an excellent presentation, if I may.
Thank
I
you.
don't want to make this one of these webinars where it's only presenters that talk, so I'll try and be quick. But I'm asking myself how I never heard about your work, and I'm really excited to go and read it because not only does it look like you've addressed a lot of different questions in L2 pragmatics with a very understudied population as far as I can tell, but your methods sound like really interesting. So like Sandy, I had a question about the learner feedback. I also like the idea of the focus group. It's always good because then kids don't feel too much like they're on the spotlight. And then you manage to cleverly to get by the sort of herd mentality where one kid says something and then everyone agrees by having them mark their crosses and talk about it. So very briefly, did you use L1 or L2 for that? The kids I've been working with wouldn't be able to do that in their first language. Then what's the status of the data that you got there? Did you treat it as secondary data? Was it just kind of a cherry on the cake, making the kids feel like they had participated and you were thanking them? Or, and then maybe last thing, if they said they didn't like that, would you take that into account in next iterations, or would that still be, because I wonder sometimes if we're not too worried about what the kids like immediately about something, and maybe they don't like an activity, but they learn from it, or maybe later on they decide that it's okay. So I just wondered what your thoughts might be on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was a quick question, but it's difficult to answer it quickly, but I'll try. Early on when we developed these methods, we became aware of the new sociology of childhood and that the participatory research that has been conducted in other fields, not so much within applied linguistics. And so we tried to use aspects of that into our own research. So, I mean, obviously, Anna Maria Pinter's work was important, but also going beyond our field. So Punch, for instance, Samantha Punch's work and so on. And later, I also discovered Laura Lundy's work. And so this chapter, I've actually tried to, what I presented today in the chapter, I've tried to present it through Lundy's framework. But I have to admit that, you know, as a PhD student, you go through a lot of development, and also my view on participation and on how children could be or should be involved has changed. So, but by that point, you know, I had already made some choices and I had collected the data. But these things such as putting them together in groups, having them seated next to me instead of opposite me, using a combination of nonverbal and verbal responses. These were all taken from Samantha Punch's work and Anna Maria Pinter's work, etc., or at least, you know, the ideas, and then we developed our own methods based on that. The responses from the emoticon appraisals themselves are secondary. I haven't analyzed those using, you know, statistics. I wouldn't be able to, like, that would be a very thin set of data for that. But what it really, like, the main purpose of that was really to get them to talk. And so it's the interviews and the discussions afterwards that were really crucial for my data collection. And so I present these numbers that I showed in the table as well as kind of providing an overview, but I wouldn't be able to analyze. So it wouldn't be valid data in that sense. I think it's so, you know, it's 4 items and then they all chose their own in addition, and those are not comparable and so on. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Beck in the chat. Thanks, Anders. Really interesting and really important. Why do you think the video task was less successful from the perspective of your participants? Do you think that the students might have responded differently if someone else asked them for their feedback? I noted you yourself were a highlight for them. Understandable, of course.
Thank you. You're way too kind, Beck, but I appreciate it. The video task. So in the field, I'm saying we have never used it myself, but it has been common to use a discourse completion task, usually written. And it has been heavily criticized for being a written tool for an oral, you know, for trying to capture speech. And so the oral DCT that I used was I had a set of videos, cartoon videos that I used. We used it in a previous study with Myrset Savic and Maria Ekonomidou-Kugitsidis in Norway and Cyprus. And then I used the same materials here. The problems were, if I can guess, but some of the learners also said some of these things. One problem was that initially we used the videos to collect data from 3rd, 5th, and 7th graders. And so I think when I had 7th graders, they found some of the videos a little bit childish. And that's what some of them even said. And then I had 8 videos. What I did in these videos, I would play a situation leading up to a request. Then I would pause the video and ask them what they think the character would say. And then they would produce requests. And then I would continue the video up until the next situation and do the same over again. And I did this with 8 different videos. So I suspect that maybe it became very monotonous and tedious for the learners, and they got a little bit bored with the task. At the same time, I think that kind of data is very important because we don't really often get an opportunity to discuss our methods and how we use them and whether they're the best. And I think especially when we're researching young language learners, what we found is that often studies use data collection instruments that have been used with adults, and they've just basically maybe changed the formulations and used the same instruments. And I think that's part of the reason why we assume that they are not able to reflect on things or why they're not able to produce, because it is not a task that is set up for them to achieve what we're asking them to achieve. And so, yeah, I hope that kind of covers what you were asking. I think if I were to do it again, I would probably reduce the number of videos, maybe have some more variety in what I was doing, and obviously change the type of video with this particular group. But I think that it's very useful knowledge to have for the next round and for the next set of data collection.
Okay, thanks. We have, I think, time for the last question, and it's also in the chat. Noriko says, "Thank you so much, Anders. Everything was clear, and I enjoyed your talk very much as always. I'd love to try to teach readers theater myself one day. Did you teach everything in the students' L2, or was it helpful anyway to use their L1?"
So now I realize that I didn't. There was one thing I didn't answer to Shona as well, if I used L1 or L2. So now we can cover both. So in the data collection, they had a choice. They could choose to use English or Norwegian. And for some of the parts, well, obviously the request production, there was no choice. They had to do it in English. But with the reflections, the important thing was their ability to actually verbalize what they were thinking. So whether they did that in English or Norwegian didn't really matter to me. I was more interested in their thinking, etc. And with the instruction, everything was taught in English, or the majority. If they needed explanations further, I would also explain in Norwegian. With the reflections, with the production tasks, they always did it in English. And with the reflections, if they needed Norwegian, they were also allowed to do that. Because again, they're thinking about this. These are complex thoughts, and they require quite a bit of language to be able to. So sometimes it was easier for them to actually think about this and discuss this in their first language. But of course, some chose to use English all the time as well. I hope that, yeah, I think that answers the question.
Okay, thanks so much. I don't know if we have time for one more short question, if there's something else. Aoife?
Hello, Anders.
Well,
Hi, thanks very much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it a lot, and I got a lot of ideas from it. It reminded me of some materials that I'd seen before, something that was called a language ladder with different forms, depending on the level of formality, which can be shown to students, to young learners, to help them see how you can say the same thing in many different ways. And it reminded me of my student teachers asking to learn about what are many different ways we can say the same thing. So I think it's a really interesting point of view. My question is, if you're considering feeding this research into designing materials yourself, and I wonder also about the role of feelings, of emotion, because I'm reading up about the role of emotions in pragmatics, and how a situation in which emotions are kind of highlighted somehow is more conducive to language learning, and also probably to understanding better the pragmatics of, why a certain form is chosen over another.
Yeah, I think you're kind of touching on a very sensitive topic within the field, because there are different views on pragmatics, and specifically appropriateness and politeness, whether that is static or dynamic. And for instance, I know Ishihara, who asked the previous question, has done some interesting work about pragmatic resistance and agency.
Yeah.
And also, for instance, Troy McConaughey has done it within intercultural pragmatics, the same, looking at how we respond emotionally to pragmatic utterances, for instance. And so the instruction in mine was focused on agency, and I didn't teach them rules. I didn't say this is polite and this is impolite. I wanted them to have a variety and think about the consequences of what they're saying, or think about, okay, what am I actually communicating with what I'm saying? Because from where I'm coming from, I think that, I don't necessarily believe that please is a polite word, for instance. I think you can use please in many ways that are not considered polite. And so, yeah, that was the aim of this instruction. But I know that some within this field would very much disagree with my view on that. So it is, but yeah, I think that what you're talking about here also relates to metapragmatic awareness, which is also a growing field. And I hope to see much more research on this topic with young language learners, because we need to know more about how they understand language use in order to develop materials that are conducive to learning, etc.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I just wanted to add also about following your comments about the reality that younger children can learn pragmatics. I think they really do, and it's just not described in that way, because we teach all these kinds of formulas and different ways of being polite or less polite. I mean, they're taught implicitly, let's put it that way, from the very beginning, with
Exactly, and I think that's why I posed this question early on as well. Are you teaching
great.
pragmatics in your classroom? Because it is, I think that we don't necessarily realize that we're doing it. And I think another problem that we've seen in research as well is that the teacher education programs, for instance, don't really introduce pragmatics, or if they do, they tend to be very theoretical. So we don't like the challenge here is really bringing the theory into the classroom, so applying it in the classroom. And I think that we see more and more research now, and I think like the book that we recently published has a discussion about this as well. And so I hope that together we are able to, provide enough information so that teacher educators can use that in their teaching, and then the result of that would again be that teachers or future teachers feel confident bringing these topics into the classroom, knowing or feeling secure about their own knowledge.
Very, very interesting.
I think this is the perfect point to wrap up. I would like to thank everybody. Please, if you could unmute and give a round of applause to Anders.